Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second part of our Saving Your History Summer Virtual Lecture Series. My name is Sean McConnell. I'm the archivist at the Rosenberg Library. We're having the summer lecture series about saving your history. So today's presentation will be about historic houses that you may own or you're interested in. Next week is our last presentation, which will be given by Sharon Gillens of the Moody Foundation on community archives and community history. So if you haven't signed up for that, I encourage you to do so. It will be next week at 11 a.m. on Saturday. Today we have Jami Durham of the Galveston Historical Foundation. Jami has a wealth of experience about Galveston history, especially Galveston's architecture and Galveston's properties. She is a co-author of the book Galveston, Playground of the Southwest that many of you may have read or own. She is our go-to person. So if we have a person at the archive who is doing property research and we aren't able to answer their questions or provide materials to help them with their research, we always give them Jami Durham's contact information because she knows what she's doing. So I'm excited to listen to this presentation today. I know Jami's going to give us a lot of good details about how to do research of our own on Galveston properties. So I'm about to mute myself and hand this over to Jami.
Well, thank you, Sean. Good morning, everyone. I want to begin by thanking Rosenberg Library and my friends Sean and Kevin and Lauren at the Galveston and Texas History Center. They are my go-to people, and I bother them quite a bit, and they're always very patient with me. So I'm going to share some of my steps with you all today. I've made some notes here so I don't leave anything out. So let's just get started with your starting point. So anytime I begin research on a building, I always start with the lot and the block number. Addresses evolved in Galveston. It might start as 1723 Ball Street, and then it becomes 1727 somewhere along the way. So lots and blocks are where I always start. When the city was laid out, it was laid out in a grid fashion. All of our avenues that run east to west are alphabet streets. So Avenue C is Mechanic, Strand is Avenue B, Broadway is Avenue J, etc. All of our streets that run north-south are numbered streets. All of the even numbered streets originally dead-ended into Avenue M. And south of Avenue M were the Galveston outlots. And you can see on the map that the squares are much bigger on the south side, closest as you approach the beach. These are your outlots. So whereas a Galveston city lot is divided into 14 lots, 7 on the north, 7 on the south, divided by an alley, the outlots were the equivalent of 4 of these city lots. And as the city grew, specifically after the American Civil War ended, during the period of Reconstruction in the 1870s, these outlots began to be divided. And the even-numbered streets, which had originally dead-ended into Avenue M, were then carried south to the beachfront, and this divided the outlots east and west. And to divide them, this divided them north-south, and to divide them east-west, the half alphabet streets came into play. And this is why when you get south of Avenue M, you begin to see Avenue M1/2, Avenue N1/2, Avenue O1/2. So these outlots, if you are researching a building in these outlots, pay particular attention to what quadrant you are in, because they are now divided into northeast, northwest, southwest, and southeast. Now, you can get your legal description on your closing papers when you purchase the building, but the quickest way to get it, I'll tell you, is just to go to the Galveston County Central Appraisal District, do a property search, and your lot and your block, or your lot and your outlot quadrant will come up. Once you have this, you go to the second step, and it's the most important step. You get this building's original insurance record, and these are accessed from the Galveston and Texas History Center at Rosenberg Library. Now, these papers contain a wealth of information. They will tell you the date of construction. They will tell you the original owner and the original building use, whether it was owner occupied or a tenant dwelling. It'll give you the original description of the building. It'll tell you any alterations or repairs or additions that were added to the building. It also notes all of the accessory buildings on the lot, which can include carriage houses, sheds, cisterns, chicken coops, and later automobile garages. We begin to see notation of those after the turn of the century. These records will also tell you chain of title. Often, not always, sometimes you don't get so lucky, but oftentimes these records will tell you chain of title from the original owner till usually about 1960s, 1970s, and then you have to jump over to CAD. So the things to pay attention to on these records, the date on the record. So on your right, you see the Texas Survey and Rating Bureau for a house that is a 2-story house, and it's situated at 1318 to 1320 Sealy on lot 12 of block 253. Now this, looking at the top, you can see this is a record that was filled out in October 6th of 1896. It tells me the house was built in 1896, and it notes the owner is W.C. Skinner. So this is a perfect record. We know that William Skinner was the owner of this house. Sometimes, though, you end up with a 1902 record that states the building was old or states the building was built in 1880, and it gives you the owner. You cannot assume that that owner is the original owner. So it's up to you to do due diligence and work that name backwards to be assured that that is your original owner and the person who is responsible for having contracted construction of that building. Sometimes also you'll find records that will note a building has been moved. For example, the record on your left, this is the record for a house in the 1200 block of Sealy, or the 1100 block of Sealy. It's a 1902 record. It tells me the house was built in 1902, but it also notes at the very top that it is on lot 2 of block 191, but you'll see that underneath lots 6 and 7 of block number 12 are marked through. You'll also see the original address of this building was 1203 Avenue M. So be very careful with the dates on the records and the owners stated on the records and the original location of these houses, because moving houses in Galveston was not unusual. We were doing it all the time, going all the way back to the 1840s. Another thing to pay attention to on these records, if you are researching a building that's on a corner lot, corner lots often have more than one house on them. So these records are often broken down into north, south, or middle part of the lot. Sometimes one house will be on the record and the other two houses on the lot will be down in the other improvements section of the record. Again, when you're researching outlots, make sure you're in the right quadrant of your outlot. And then in the remarks section, this is sometimes a gold mine of information. The remarks section will include the notes about the accessory buildings, but sometimes it will include, for instance, the date the house was wired for electricity, or it might include a note about a fire in the building and repairs. Or in the case of 3624 Avenue R&1/2, a Galveston Historical Foundation property rehabbed by our revolving fund. Down on the bottom of this record in tiny print, it was noted that the house was shipped, prefabricated from Michigan, ready to put together. And with a little research, we were able to determine that this was an Aladdin kit house that had been shipped to the owner who erected it as a rental property. And then lastly, sometimes these records will indicate the contractor of the building. Maybe it's an early 20th century building. You might see the Johnson brothers mentioned quite a bit. Rarely, but sometimes they will include an architect's name. I will say that the majority of Galveston's historic building inventory, however, was not architecturally designed. The majority of houses were from builders' planning books. So once I work this record over and I decipher it completely, I go back to the owner's name mentioned, and to be assured that that is the original owner, you have to put in some due diligence. And sometimes this is the process of researching the building that will often take the most time. So chains of title can be tracked through real estate transfers that are noted in the Galveston newspapers, the Daily News, the Galveston Tribune. They both recorded real estate transfers. The Galveston County tax rolls will note ownership of lots and blocks. The Galveston County Clerk Archive deed records will also note property transfers. And the Galveston County Central Appraisal District will also note property transfers back to a certain time point. And typically, if I have a gap, I will get the oldest owner noted on the Galveston County Central Appraisal District website and take that name and work it backwards until I connect with the name on the building's original insurance record. So sometimes real estate transfers were actually cut out of the newspapers and taped to the bottoms of these original insurance records and dated. And I've shown you a sample here on the top right. You can search for these real estate transfers through newspaperarchives.com or newspapers.com. I believe, now I'll tell you both of these are subscription services, but I do believe with your Rosenberg Library card, I do believe you can access these websites from the Rosenberg Library digital database website. Sorry, I got tongue-tied. Like I said, CAD will often show the earliest owner, sometimes tracked back to the 80s. That name I will take backwards and often run through newspaper archives to see if I can get a hit in real estate transfers. Gaps in time can also be tracked through the Galveston County tax rolls. There's a tax roll on your bottom right of your screen. They were alphabetical. They noted the name of the bill, your name, and what lots and blocks you owned property in, their value. These are often helpful, by the way, in dating a property. If you end up with an insurance record that just says old, sometimes you can track the owner on these tax rolls and look for an improvement on the tax roll, which is an added value that often indicates the appearance of a building on that lot. And then the Galveston County Clerk digital database online will also help you find deed transfers, property transfers, deeds, as well as obituaries. Wills, last wills and testaments, I might say, which are also sometimes helpful in tracking ownership of these properties. So it's rather involved, but if you stick with it, it's connecting the dots all the way back to when the building was built. And like I said, sometimes you're lucky. Sometimes you'll get an insurance record that is dated the same year the house was built, and you're assured that that is your original owner's name. But the majority of the time, it's not that way. You'll get a record, like I said, dated in 1902 that states the building is owned by John Smith and the building was built in 1870. You cannot take for granted that John Smith built that building. So once I reconcile, I've deciphered its insurance record. I am confident that I have chain of title on the building. Well, then I turn back to the building and I start tracking the progress and additions and or loss of footprint of these buildings through maps. The most common maps I turn to are the Sanborn Fire Insurance maps. These were produced for Galveston in 1877, 1885, 1889, 1899, 1912, 1947, and final updates were done in 1985. And the majority of these maps, well, let me go back and say 1877 was just downtown, as was 1885. By 1889, these maps began to branch out into the residential districts. And you can see the footprints of these buildings. And I enjoy these maps. I find them quite beautiful. The colors that represented the different building materials. Yellow indicates a frame building. Blue indicates a stone building. Red indicates a brick building. Down here, bottom left, is the 1889 footprint of Ashton Villa. And in your bottom right is the 1899 footprint of the Gresham Mansion, known as Bishop's Palace. So I access these Sanborn Fire Insurance maps and I watch the evolution of the footprint of the lot and I chart it forward. If I have a building that is older than 1870, the 1889 maps will show me, or it's a building not in downtown and I'm looking into the residential areas older than 1889. The bird's eye view maps of Galveston that were produced in 1871 and 1885 are often helpful. These are available on the Amon Carter website in high resolution, and they allow you to zoom in on your lot and your block. If I think it's older than that, we have access to the 1865 Civil War defenses map that's in the top right corner. Again, it just shows you the footprint of what was on your block. 1885 fire map and the 1900 storm destruction map are also sometimes helpful. So now that's the third step. First step, your insurance record. Second step, your chain of title. Third step, now we've charted the lot through the maps as far as we can go. Now I take that name, our original owner, and I shake it out upside down. I run that original name through city directories and newspaper archives. I can see what other properties they may have purchased. I can see in the city directories what they did, how many people are in that household, what the wife's name is. The city directories are also quite fun, and I find myself getting lost in them. The first city directory was published in Galveston in 1857. Then there was a second directory published in 1859. During the American Civil War, directories were put on hold and they resumed in 1866. And the directories continued forward until 1996. And they tell you, like I said, who is in the household, what their occupation is, how many people are in that household, who they work for. Advertisements for businesses are in the city directories. And these city directories are available also at the Galveston and Texas History Center at Rosenberg Library. And staff has taken the time to digitize many of these, which are available online through the portal of Texas History. The newspaper archives, let me jump back to city directories real quick. In 1908, city directories began to include a cross directory. So beginning in 1908, you can go to the cross directory and see who's living in the building. This is helpful if your house is being used as a tenant property. You'll be able to see the variety of people who might have resided under the roof. City directories will also help you track subsequent owners, their occupations, and follow the building through to the 1990s. Newspaper archives, going back to newspaper archives. I search newspaper archives every day on buildings. Sometimes I search the name of the person who built it or subsequent owners. Sometimes I just run the address through. You just never know what you might find in the newspaper archives. You might find that your house was being used as a tenant property or a boarding house, or the newspaper archives can help you determine if your house was ever subdivided or turned into a duplex or apartments, or any alterations. Building permits are posted in newspaper art. You'll find them in the newspapers. So they too are a complete wealth of information. Most notably, obituaries. I look up obituaries of original owners a lot to get an overview of their lives and what they did, their accomplishments, etc. Obituaries will also name survivors, and those names often come into play as chains of title and changing hands of the property. As you research that, you might see a name you don't recognize. You don't know who that name is. It may come after an owner, and you might, through the obituary, see, oh, well, that was his daughter. She must have inherited it. Things like that. It'll help you, again, connect those dots when you're wearing your history detective hat. So after I have exhausted city directories and newspaper archives, both websites, newspaperarchives.com and newspapers.com, and incidentally, the Portal of Texas, also you can access old newspapers through the portal as well. And the portal is a free website, by the way. Then I take it all and I turn to private and public archives and genealogical websites as I search for historic documents and historic images. The number one request I get when people ask me to research their building is, can I find an old photograph? Sometimes I can, but sometimes I can't. My first resource is always the Galveston and Texas History Center. Their digitized street scenes where you can go through them online by street to search for a building. They've also digitized 1900 storm destruction photos by street, and you can often find a photo there. Barring that, I've got 3 photos up here that I was lucky enough to find in Ancestry. So much information is now being scanned and shared digitally. We have new info coming up every day. And if you can take the name of your original owner or subsequent owners, particularly if they own the building for a long time, you might find a family tree on that person, and attached to it, as in the top right corner, on Easter Sunday in 1896, everybody piled on the front porch of the house and someone took a photograph. So occasionally you will find that pot of gold under the rainbow. It's not every day, but it is possible. These genealogical websites also contain immigration records, naturalization papers, passports. So sometimes you might find an image of your original owner through these documents. These genealogical websites also connect to Find a Grave, and often Find a Grave is helpful in connecting dots, family members, birth dates, death dates, where they were from. And sometimes these Find a Grave files will have images attached to them. So that was a whole lot of information I just gave you. So resources that I use the most that are available to all of you. For Galveston's architectural history, I recommend the Galveston Architecture Guidebook, authored by architectural historians Stephen Fox and Ellen Beasley. I also recommend Mrs. Beasley's book, The Alleys and Back Buildings of Galveston. For general history of Galveston, I recommend Dr. David McComb's Galveston, A History. There's also the Galveston Historic Homes Tour catalogs. Galveston Historical Foundation has produced this event for 46 years. And within those 46 catalogs are the histories of over 300 buildings. And these are available through Galveston Historical Foundation archives. In-person or digital databases that you can access, you have Rosenberg Library and the Galveston and Texas History Center. I believe they're still available by appointment only. Online, you have the Texas State Historical Association's Texas Online, and you have the Portal to Texas History, which is a wonderful website where archival and lending institutions all over the state have scanned and digitized material and made them available to the public for free access. This includes Rosenberg Library's efforts to digitize the city directories. Newspapers are available on the portal, free. You won't find all of them, but you will find some of them. The University of Texas libraries are where I access the colored versions of the old Sanborn fire insurance maps. SMU library, I have found historic images and documents pertaining to Galveston on that website. The genealogical websites I hit are ancestry.com and Family Search. Family Search is a free website operated by the Church of Latter-day Saints. You do have to open an account with them, but it is free. And this is where I find actual copies of the Galveston County tax rolls. And then, of course, our county databases are the Central Appraisal and the Galveston County Clerk Archive, where many of these documents have been scanned and are available to you. Now, what are you going to do with all of that? It's a whole lot, and you've put in the effort. You've done your work. You have a historic building, and now you want to preserve it. You want to share it. How do you do that? There are a few things I would recommend. The first would be to apply for a WEA1 exemption. Now, the majority of Galveston's historic building inventory is outside of the boundaries of our 6 historic districts. The map I have on the left is a map of our neighborhoods that highlight the districts. You have the East End Historic District and the Strand Mechanic, which are the oldest, established in 1976. The Silk-Stocking Historic District is within Kempner Park neighborhood. Lost Bayou is within the San Jacinto neighborhood. And then the Cedar Lawn National Register District is in Lasker Park, and Denver Court is down in the Denver Resurvey. If your building is within the boundaries of any of these historic districts, it has a certain level of protection afforded to it because of those boundaries and National Register landmark guidelines. If it's outside of the district, one way to protect it, if it's in one of these unprotected areas, is this windstorm exemption application. Any building that's older than 50 years old can be considered eligible if the original material, the siding, the original wood windows, doors, sashes, trim, if all of that is still intact, many of these buildings can be deemed eligible. And once this exemption is received, that historic building material is protected by this exemption, and it allows you, the building owner, to repair in kind if the building is damaged, and thereby it protects the historic integrity of your building. These windstorm exemption applications are available on Galveston Historical Foundation's website. They are mailed to me. I am the facilitator. You mail them to me and I start them along their process with the 3 reviewers, or you are also welcome to drop it off in my office. Also administered by Galveston Historical Foundation is the 1900 Storm Survivor Plaque. If you have a building that is pre-1900 that did survive the storm, you can apply for a plaque. Any building is eligible for consideration. Although 3,600 buildings, approximately 3,600 buildings were destroyed during the 1900 storm, the vast majority of our building inventory did survive the hurricane. And many of these buildings have this beautiful bronze plaque beside their doors to identify them as a survivor. This application is also available on the Galveston Historical Foundation website or by emailing me, and I can send you a copy. Now, other ways to preserve your history are through landmark designations. The City of Galveston has a Galveston landmark application available on their website. It is submitted to the Planning Department at City Hall. These applications are reviewed by the Landmark Commission, then the Planning Commission, with final approval by City Council. If granted, property owners are presented the plaque to place on their building and there are no fees involved, I'd like to note. So these landmark designations are available to public buildings, to institutional buildings, but to houses as well, small and large. Now, a little more involved would be a recorded Texas Historic Landmark designation hosted by the Texas Historical Commission. These are typically called RTHLs. They are a very lengthy application, plus a documented narrative and a historic timeline that highlights the building's significance to local history, as well as a statement of architectural significance are required for these applications. So they're a bit more involved. There are application fees and marker fees, if approved, that are the responsibility of the building owner. RTHLs have become highly coveted and they are extremely competitive. Once received, this designation protects the historic integrity of the building, and future repairs and alterations go through a review process with the Texas Historical Commission staff. So this RTHL protects the building from any future alterations, changes, or demolition. The other marker that is available to you through the Texas Historical Commission would be a subject marker. Now, subject markers are granted for events like Mardi Gras, Juneteenth, the Mexican Telegraph Company building, for example. Juneteenth and Mardi Gras are both subject markers that I was involved in. Subject markers do not protect the buildings that they are associated with, but they record the story of the significant occurrence or event that occurred in that area. So subject markers and RTHL markers are identical, but a subject marker, I must emphasize, does not protect the building. The best example I can give you is the Olga Samaroff subject marker that was granted by the Texas Historical Commission in 2016. And it's placed in front of the house where she lived with her parents. It's there on the bottom, the large picture on the middle of the screen there. This notes Olga Samaroff's story, but again, a subject marker does not protect the building and does not designate the building a recorded Texas State Historic Landmark. These are two different designations. So I've given you a whole lot of information. I'm going to put my contact information there on the screen. You are welcome to contact me in my office at Galveston Historical Foundation. My email is my first and last name with a period between at galvestonhistory.org, or my direct line at the foundation is 409-765-3453. And with that, if we have any questions in our chat room, Courtney, I'm happy to field those.
Hello, Jamie. I just sent you one myself. Have you encountered any surprises in the records? And do you have a favorite house that you've researched?
I have encountered some surprises in the records. One was the Aladdin Kit house. That was a surprise. And then just recently, you and I were, I was questioning you on what you had on a house this week, that the records indicated at one point it had been owned by the Ever Ready Charity Club, which was curious. And as I ran that through newspaper archives, I discovered that the Ever Ready Charity Club formed in 1916 to establish a home for aged Negro women. And this building that I was looking at on Avenue K had been known as Mary's Home for Aged Negro Women from 1922 through the 1940s. So yes, I always find a surprise. Do I have a favorite house that I've researched? No, they're all my favorites. I get attached to every single building I research. And then if you ride around with me in my car on the island and you might note, oh, I like that house, as often happens when I have visitors visiting, I will just jokingly go into the Jami Durham tour mode, as my children say, and I will spew forth that building's history. So I love them all and I enjoy researching them all.
Very nice, thank you. We do have another question. What is the benefit of getting a windstorm exemption application?
The benefit of getting a windstorm exemption application, that's a good question. It does not mean you don't have to have windstorm insurance. You do. What it does is it protects your building. So if your building is catastrophically damaged by a fire or a flood or a hurricane, with your exemption, you will be allowed to repair the building in kind and not forced to repair the building using the most modern building materials up to the most modern building codes. So if your wood sash 2/2 wood windows or your triple sashed floor to ceiling wood windows are damaged in a hurricane, you would be allowed to repair and replace those windows with wood windows identical to them that you have perhaps found in a salvage warehouse. We operate a salvage warehouse. Many of the antique dealers as well sell architectural salvage. You will be allowed to repair in kind and thereby preserve the historic integrity of your building. The best and most awful example I can give you reverts back to Hurricane Ike in 2008. If your house was more than 55% damaged by that hurricane and it was outside of one of those 6 historic districts, many building owners were forced to demolish their houses and build new. You can see these new houses that were erected after Hurricane Ike scattered throughout the neighborhoods. If you had a WEA exemption on the building and it was damaged after Ike, you were allowed to repair it in kind and you were given more time. So in a nutshell, the benefit of a WEA1 exemption protects the historic material of your historic house and thereby preserves the historic integrity of your building.
Okay, a follow-up question. If you are inside one of the historic districts, do you still need to get the WEA exemption?
It doesn't hurt. The houses inside the districts have a certain level of protection afforded to them by being in those National Register boundaries, but it does not hurt to also have a WEA1 exemption as well.
Okay, thank you.
By the way, many of these houses already have WEA1 exemptions. Once granted, they stay with the building in perpetuity. It does not matter who the owner is. And a complete list and up-to-date list of approved properties are available for you to review on the Galveston Historical Foundation website.
Before I ask the next question, I want to point out that newspaperarchive.com has most of our newspaper collections digitized. This includes our copies of the Galveston Daily News. However, it doesn't have our older issues of the Galveston Tribune. we're sending that to the Portal to Texas History. That's been an ongoing project for the past couple of years. We're about to send a new batch up shortly. So our collection of the Galveston Tribune is mostly available through the Portal to Texas History, which, as Jamie said, is a free resource. Jamie, have you used the Galveston Tribune at all for your property research?
I do. In fact, the building we just spoke about, Mary's Colored Home for Aged Negro Women, I was on the portal yesterday trying to piece together ownership and the age of that building through real estate transfers, and had great luck on the portal through the Galveston Tribune. Those scans are so clear. The search engine often picks up things in the Tribune on portal that the newspaperarchives.com and newspapers.com miss. So I hit all three.
Yes, they are very nice in the portal.
I'll also say the Galveston Tribune is also lovely for recording the social occurrences. And you might find your property owner has left for an extended vacation of Europe, or your property owner has guests visiting from Canada, or so they'll tell you a lot about the people. And the other newspaper that I pick up quite frequently on the portal is the City Times, which was an African-American newspaper.
Yes, that is a great resource too.
Yes.
Someone just asked if this will be recorded and how they can watch it later. It is being recorded, and it will be available on the Rosenberg Library YouTube page. And with that said, I do want to point out that my colleague Kevin Kinney gave a presentation recently about accessing the portal and searching the Galveston Tribune. That video is available right now on our YouTube page. Kevin, if you could send a link to that in the chat box. So if you're wanting to know how we go about searching the Galveston Tribune, I recommend watching his presentation. And then this presentation will probably be placed online in a week or so. We have to edit it and then post it. So just keep checking our YouTube page to see it. Okay, we have another question. If you are trying to save a building, would getting a designation help? Which one would you get?
Yes, if you're trying to save a building, a designation always helps. But WEA1 application would be the first one I would go for. Landmark designations are also extremely helpful in saving a building, but the condition of the building comes into play when applying for a landmark designation. So sometimes we're trying to save buildings that are suffering from a neglect and maintenance. So you often have to repair these buildings and get them in good shape before you can apply for a landmark.
You mentioned that, oh, sorry, go ahead. You mentioned there being a 1985 sandboard map. Where's that available?
That is available through the Galveston Historical Foundation archive. I was lucky enough to meet someone who had a copy of it who allowed me to scan it. So if you ever want to jump from 1947 to 1985, give me a call.
All right, thank you. It's good to know.
You're welcome.
If anyone else has any questions, feel free to enter that in the chat box. I think everyone's all set for right now. So I want to thank you again, Jamie, for giving all this great information about conducting research on properties and how to set the ball rolling for getting a plaque or getting a historical designation. We do get a lot of questions about that. So I'm glad that you covered those topics. And I want to thank everyone for joining us. This recording will be available on our YouTube page. Kevin just gave the link in the chat box. And please join us next week for the last presentation of our summer series given by Sharon Gillings about why your history matters. So thank you everyone for joining, and thank you very much, Jamie, for giving the talk today.
It was my pleasure. Thank you all, and enjoy your old buildings.
Yes, thank you.
Bye-bye.